Joe, were you going to bring up your Buildpacks again for this one? Or
yeah, sure.
I don't know if there are things to talk about. It just feels like a thing we should get through at some point.
Yeah, there's plenty to talk about.
Fussy Italian coffee apparently takes 10 minutes, not 4 minutes, as I thought.
You just have to end the leadership meeting earlier, Ben. Yeah. Should have been like, no, Javier, you can't bring up that point because I got to make coffee.
Stephen, I believe we can begin.
All right. My designated person who runs this meeting. First item is introductions and new faces. Any new faces here? It looks like we have a smaller group today than usual. Don't see anybody who doesn't usually show up. Next item on the list is release planning and updates. Any updates from anybody?
080 with some important performance improvements for remote repos, some better error messages, and a bug fix around integrating with Harbor, the newest version of Harbor. I go on a limb and say it was their bug because they don't implement the registry API, but it handles it now anyways.
Did you reach out to the Harbor folks internally to let them know?
No, I didn't. I can do that. I do think the change we made is probably safer in the long run than assuming everyone is strictly returning the error codes that are in the registry spec.
Still, there's a spec. they may not be aware that they are in violation. Okay.
So you just assume people don't follow the spec now?
Certainly
Well,
not VMware employees anyway.
for the cases in question, the spec says you should return a 404 status code and then also has additional error codes, like domain-specific error codes in the body of the response. And we were doing our logic based on the error codes, but really we want to treat all the 404s the same anyways. So I think the change is fine and cautious.
All right. Anything else on release planning? If not, I'm going to share my screen and we'll do the weekly RFC overview. Everybody see that window?
Looks good.
Good, cool. Fix my zoom. All right. Read, write, platform mounts. I think this is coming up today. So
Yeah, the first two of those are, first two.
It's gonna be interesting, these first two. I think Jesse, is Jesse here? Yeah, you brought this one up. Or you opened this one based on a PR from Dave Sire from before. Anything?
I think we'll just be working through the feedback on that, but it looks like it's already well on its way.
Yeah, I believe we're already through all the
FCP.
feedback. We're now at FCP.
Yeah, it looks like, Terrence, is there a issue?
We wanted to add some specifics on like the spec changes, so I can work with him on adding that.
Cool. Increase build plan flexibility. Oh yeah, this one.
This will come up today as well.
Cool. I'll skip over it. Offline build packages RFC. Is Dan here or Forrest or anybody who can speak to Forrest? Is this in a good state? Anything, do you want to talk about this today or?
I mean, I don't know that much about it. It would be more on Dan to talk about. I think that it's doing fine, but I don't know the exact state of this.
Got it. I think he was going to update this, given the feedback from last time, like removing package toml, I think was the next step. Ben and somebody suggested.
Yeah.
Pack image pull policy, I think that's on the list, right?
Yes.
Non-breaking lifecycle support for pre-1.0 API minor versions. Is this approved? Looks pretty approved. Anything else there?
I think everyone actually approved this. It is unanimous at this point.
I'll move it to FCP.
Thank you. Add RFC for stack metadata. This is cache up. Is cache up here? This one, can anybody speak to this one?
Those appear to be lagging a bit if the last comment was 18 days ago.
I see a 7 days up here from you though.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Yep.
Someone who's a direct report of cache up, give him a kick in the ass for me, please.
Cache up's on the product side, actually. All right. So I'll try to reach out to Cache Up and see where this is going. Root build pack, I think that's in the list for today. Is that right? Joe, do you want to chat about this one? Cool. Publish build pack with pack, I think that's in the list. So many RFCs today. Process specific environment variables. This can get closed because it's being replaced by the one Jesse opened here, number 83. Is that right?
Correct. That is safe to close now.
Cool. Done. RFC for custom CA certs.
Is that back on draft?
It's draft, right? Sorry, of course.
Looking for someone to adopt it. Do I remember saying that Xander has put it up for adoption?
Yes, I think we wanted to block. Sorry, go ahead.
We moved it to draft, didn't we? So
Yeah, I think in general we wanted to block it on the root build pack discussion because driving out that interface will help, and it's a draft just because we didn't want to forget that we do need to support CA certs somehow, and then we'll either close it or it might just go away and there's a root CA cert build pack and that's it. Build plan merging. This one
probably close this one, to be honest. I don't know that I'm going to be pursuing anything more in this.
Cool. There were some structural changes to the build plan that we talked about, like not having single entries for all the individual ones. That would make me nervous about proceeding with other changes unless we did that. Was anybody going to pick up those structural changes, like combining the entries into a single itemed list instead of arbitrary unordered things with unmatching names?
And it's probably dependent on the discussion with Ben too, of how we kind of want to go with that, right? Kind of like competing RFCs.
I would be willing to pick up that, but I think it's just so far removed from where this RFC's ended up. We should probably close this one.
Okay, sounds good. And
I believe it was asked the last time. I'm definitely in support for that particular thing, like a simplification there. So I'd be happy to see that. And Terrence, I don't think actually this was in particular opposition. Mine is removing a key that exists, so it's somewhat orthogonal to combining the multiple names thing.
So we're saying we don't want that RFC close?
Well, yeah, I think closing build plan, merging, and opening a new RFC to go a different direction feels right. It would have been the third iteration on that in that particular title.
It would have been a lot of Shift V going to the bottom and hitting the D key. So
let me, rather than us closing, actually, I'm going to open it back up real quick and FCP it for close.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Image exposes metadata for all layers that participated in images build. This was Paul. I haven't seen him in these working group meetings recently. He was going to explore Project TOML. Anybody?
Report TOML, right?
Right, sorry, yes, report TOML.
I can reach out to him and see if he is intending on doing a follow-up on that or if we should get someone else to own it.
Sounds good.
Report TOML's got merged last time, right? So you should be good to go from that perspective.
Awesome. App image extensions. This is part of root build pack. I'm still leaving it open until we get to a more narrow consensus on root build pack, although I think we're pretty close to that already. So I'll probably close it this week. All right, and that is our RFC review. Jumping down next on the list, I'm going to try to be a little more strict of a moderator for this one because we have so many RFCs. The first question I have is, are there any RFCs here that people feel like they don't need to talk about today, and I'll just prioritize them at the bottom in case we don't get them?
Mine is already at the bottom, the pack image pool policy.
Got it. Anything else? Or like, is there somebody missing who would be good for some of the conversations on the other ones? All right, we'll start at the top. Publish a build pack with pack.
Yeah, so this one, if this is not ready for votes, it's not clear to me what needs to change. I'm not saying that there aren't changes that can be made. I just don't know what needs to happen to move it forward. So I'd either like to vote on it or just get more direction on what we need to look at.
I look and I believe Joe and or Terrence are the final commenter on every single outstanding comment today. And I assume Terrence just added something recently and Joe can sort that out with him. Meaning that we're ready to vote. Or if a response has come into a comment that you've done, can you please either resolve it or continue that conversation so that we have an indication? Javier.
Sorry, what was the call out for my name about?
So Joe's concerned that he doesn't know what needs to be done for us to go and vote. And I would say the outstanding thing is looking at all the comments that have been put in here, including by you, Javier, although I noticed my name there as well, so I'll call myself out. Joe is the final comment on all of them. So can we resolve those conversations if we feel that they're resolved, or continue them on so that we know that we need to wait?
Cool. Yeah.
During the last working group meeting, I commented verbally, but didn't leave a comment in the GitHub issue that the schema for the registries list could use fixed schema instead of key names or like arbitrary key names in the table names. So like default registry and registries as an object list with a name key. I can add a comment in there, but that's what was holding up my vote.
Yeah, I wasn't here last week, so I didn't hear that, I guess.
Yeah, and I wasn't sure I understood exactly it, but I think now that you mention it, maybe we could talk about it at length here as well.
The schema thing?
Yeah. If that's the major thing that's holding back the vote, right?
Sure. Let me share my screen. This is real quick. It's a simple thing. I thought, Joe, you were, maybe it wasn't last week, maybe it was at some other point, but just this, you see, sorry, did my share work?
Yes.
Oh, good, cool. Just this, if we could move to, and like, I could be convinced we shouldn't, it's just everywhere else we seem to stick to something more like this, name equals GitHub or whatever, and then a top level key like default registry.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Cool.
Do we have another place that we have this sort of, not the structure that's being proposed, but more or less the objects in the way where one references another, and then there's attributes on that other thing, if that makes sense? Because I couldn't really think of any TOML file where this is the case, but if I look for like prior art on, I believe, Nginx and Apache, like you'd see references where they use this sort of config mechanism, where if you have something that's being referenced, it would be then named under that object, if that makes sense. So I have a very slight preference. I wouldn't say that I have any strong preference here, but it does look cleaner. And then my only other thought to that was kind of the whole idea or premise of how you would manipulate TOML objects isn't that one of like the selling points where you could append to that object if you use the same name if you wanted to update a property, or I guess I should say add a property to that object?
So you're saying that in this form, it makes it easy to append to the end of the TOML file with additional configuration because you can reopen the object within the object and add additional fields, but in this form, it's harder to do that because it's
by an array, right? Yeah, by index.
It makes sense.
I don't know if that's true, but I mean, that's kind of like my understanding of TOML.
I think that's true. I'm not sure when it's I forget exactly when it's acceptable to reopen. You can definitely reopen objects and add more things. I forget exactly. Like, I think what you're saying is correct. We've stuck to fixed key names everywhere because it like lets you avoid marshalling into maps, and there's some like nice code things and having fully fixed schema. And it's a little more extensible because it always lets you add additional fields, and Kate's uses it a lot. Like in Kate's YAML, they're rarely variable key names. There's some places where there are, but you know, it's like an environment variable list is a list, and there's name and value, etc. We've done this in the past in other places, and so my only comment is it's less consistent with the configuration we have files we have other places. I don't have a strong opinion that we should keep doing what we're doing, other than I'm going to keep saying that this is what we've been doing when we propose something different. But if we want to change direction on that, seems okay. There's some weird things about having this, like table names vary, like because they have special characters in them, you have to do weird quotey things inside of this object, and can get ugly. But I don't have terribly strong opinions about it.
Say the same here. So maybe Joe, you could just prefer something and go for it.
Yep.
In general, like a list seems like it should be a list and not a, but I don't know. Anything else on this one?
Was there a resolution to the published conversation that Javier and Joe had?
Regards to the
It was actually
pull flag?
Javier and me. Joe, it's the one thing Joe hasn't participated in. I just put a little clarity in saying, Joe, I'm going to defer to your choice. The arguments are both there, and you can make a choice and I'll resolve it with what you choose.
Yeah, it seemed like generally the feeling was like maybe we should do something about -- publish, but like this should still probably be published build pack. So I don't know.
I agree with that. And I think it, if anything, it'll present itself, and maybe that could be the driver for changing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we're going to stick with what's currently in the RFC. Is that what I hear?
That's what I'm advocating, yeah.
Cool, sounds good.
Publish build pack always publishes to a register, like it always does something external anyways, right? So hopefully there's not ambiguity that it's actually doing something local and it's confusing. So that makes sense to me. All right, anything else on publishing a build pack with pack?
The only thing I haven't reviewed is the headless option. I know that was recently added. Joe, do you want to speak about how that would work? Thinking about the delivery aspect of it.
Yeah, I added it as the OAuth behavior that I think Ben was talking about, as opposed to a service that would handle that had like a REST API or something like that. So that's sort of the main thing here. It's still communicating with GitHub, and there's no service. Other proposals I did had like headless talking to the REST API of some service.
So does headless not work with the Git option then? Is that correct? Like the non-Git option.
Might be a no-op. I mean, I think like these flags would have different behaviors depending on the registry type. So I wouldn't say it doesn't work. It just might be a no-op. Whereas like if we have some kind of service thing, it'd probably be the same way. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I'm just wondering, is it worth kind of specifying the condition of like what happens in the Git case, since we do have two kind of options suggested here of types of registry? Sorry, go ahead, Stephen.
Sorry, is there still a mode where the build pack registry gets a GitHub credential of some sort from you that could then be used to manipulate things in your GitHub account?
Not outside of like an OAuth. And I'm even saying that we potentially don't store the refresh token.
But the refresh token for your GitHub, this could be used to act as you on GitHub, does get sent to the service that we're going to maintain. And so... No,
I don't. Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
There's no service that's going to be maintained though, right?
Well, the OAuth callback thing, right?
You need to negotiate an OAuth token so that you can open the PR, right, against the GitHub repo. And so the token will be passed to a GitHub API to behave against a Buildpacks repo, but never shows up into any running piece of code server side from the from the CMB project, and only ever exists in storage. And I'm actually okay with the idea of storing the refresh token itself. Only exists on the user's local machine. It never leaves the machine other than to mint an access token and send the access token away to the GitHub API.
It lets you log in using a browser or whatever to GitHub gets a refresh token and then acts on your behalf to GitHub, but the token is only ever used, no credentials ever are possessed by anybody that's not your local machine or
Right.
GitHub. Cool.
Yeah, and to be clear, like we control a bit of that code, right? Like we could do something nasty with our CLI, but that's sort of a trust thing that you're gonna have to go, because we'll ask, like, I think implicitly, oh man, OAuth really confuses me around this. Implicitly, we're going to get a relatively low permission token in the first place. Like the thing we're going to request probably needs whatever the minimum thing is to, like, it doesn't even necessarily need identity. It needs whatever the minimum requirements are to open APR.
Yeah, I mean, at the point where we're running local code on their machine, like there's plenty of nasty things we could do at that point. So that doesn't worry me.
Yeah.
Just wanted to understand the operational aspects of, do we need to operate something that has to be secure to a certain extent? And as long as
Yeah, so I believe that means we'll own an application, an OAuth application in the GitHub sense, but the GitHub application will be our CLI, not a server-side component.
Exactly. So there is no service per se. But kind of going back, and I'm not sure if I'm just misunderstanding something, but the -- headless in the way that I would think we need is more for CI purposes and not so much for anything, like you wouldn't even have the capability of signing in through OAuth at that point, right? So to me, I don't know that that's the right solution if that's what we're thinking here. Right, so like the use case that headless should be solving is, hey, I want to run this on GitHub Actions. It should be able to create a PR, right? Or I want to run this on Concourse, Jenkins, whatever, right? And I don't have access to the browser at all.
Yeah, is the addition of headless actually wrong? Because headless, you'd need a personal access token effectively to make that whole thing work versus an OAuth. I was just clarifying, yeah, maybe I put the comment in the wrong place in the first place.
No, I mean, it might have been me just connecting two dots that shouldn't have been connected.
Yeah.
And headless only makes sense for GitHub, right? Because if you don't have GitHub, you just git commit. So is this a specific thing to the GitHub registry?
Yeah, because for everything else, you'd just have your Git credentials and, .NET RC or whatever governing it.
Yeah, I almost wonder, like the benefit of doing like it on GitHub Actions is that you don't need the GitHub token.
But there is still a token.
Yeah, there's a per repo token at least.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like we could also just at this point punt and say if you want to do it via CI, you need to open the issue manually or something.
I don't think that's the case. I like the idea of, so -- headless is a thing. It's just tied to the wrong behavior. -- headless given an access token, right, where you pass in an access token is great, right, or a username and password or whatever. This is the way you want to do it. You use the substitution behaviors and GitHub Actions to get all of that information. -- headless meaning that is a feature worth having. Then there is another clarification that I'd aimed for that said, in the case where you're not running headless, where you're running locally, we are only doing an OAuth thing. We don't want you to give us an access token. What we want to do is negotiate an OAuth token instead.
The only, I guess, the things that are at odds with each other with that proposal versus opening the browser directly is, if they were the only two options that we could pick from, right? But we technically could have more. I'm not sure if I'm explaining it correctly, but the default behavior is that it's going to open up the browser and it's going to have a pre-filled template, right? And we're saying an alternative to that is we could use the REST API and we could use an OAuth flow to do that for you, right? But in that case, it is going to open up the browser at least once so you could authorize it, but then no more after that.
But maybe not once for each push, for each PR, right? If you've got a viable refresh token from a previous login, this particular session may never open a browser.
Right, exactly. And then there's the other one, which I'm more interested in, which is as a CI, Jenkins, something where there is no way to interact with it.
Yep.
I want to be able to publish this, right?
Yeah, and
via
that
the
should
GitHub
be
API.
And that should be hidden by, or that should be triggered with a -- headless or some equivalent flag and the provision of a personal authentication token and username.
Can we start with just the first and the last of those cases? Because it seems like those meet real use cases. And then a workflow that automatically opens it, but also requires a browser. Like it seems like we'd like people to review their PRs if they're there to review them, right? And unless they completely can't, in which case it's got to be a
But given that it's a template
anyways.
that's being filled in, like what's the review, right? Like when I sat here in front of my code and I wrote pack publish build pack, right? Like all of the information that's going to be in that PR is automatically generated by the pack tool for me. It's not going to be wrong.
It's not reviewing the correctness of the thing you're submitting. It's understanding that we're about to act on, we're a local CLI tool and we're about to act on behalf of your user, and making you actually do the acting part seems safer than having the tool that does an action in a place automatically for you without you knowing necessarily that that's what it's going to do.
YN on the command line?
Sorry?
What about YN on the command line without opening a browser? Is that not enough affirmative confirmation?
I don't have a strong opinion. It just my preference would be the tool that's going to go post something using my GitHub account would, let me do the thing, if that makes sense. But
so, yeah, I mean, like
totally
chopping it out completely, basically never having the CLI have no awareness of you as a user and simply opening a specially formatted URL. That's the only sort of non-headless variant of it, maybe.
Yeah, so why don't, as a proposal, right, we go with that as the first iteration. So we have that option where it pre-fills, we have the option of headless, and then we have the get option, right? And then if there's desire to improve the UX, which I believe, Ben, that's what you're after, and I agree with it, right? But we could kind of take that on as a second story. I don't know that we want to battle out those two in this particular issue.
I can get on board with that.
And Joe, I could help out with the headless option.
Yeah, let's talk about that some more.
Cool. I'm going to move on to the next thing, just in the interest of time, because we got a bunch of RFCs. Next one on the list is increase build plan flexibility.
I'll share screen if you don't mind.
Sure. There we go.
Since mine are the next three in a row, the first one is increase build plan flexibility. This was in an attempt to be a bit more constructive than just complaining about the one about build plan merging. I decided that I wanted to put my money where my mouth was and say, hey, actually, I think we should be advocating for something that's less complex than what we have today, which isn't particularly complex. And part of that was removal of the version key, which it turns out is not, it's not rarely used, but it's certainly not used in a majority of the time. And part of that is the prior art where we did the list of the build packs that uses version or do not use version. And these are ones that I'm aware of. So don't think that they're complete and authoritative in any way. But fundamentally, the request is remove the version key, demote it so that you can put version into a metadata field. And use it as you see fit. You can, glue it together when you're given a bunch of these things. You can do straight replacement where last wins. It's completely up to you. It doesn't have a particular pride of placement within the API. So that's build plan flexibility. Next one. Sorry. Anybody have any questions on that before we go further?
Yes. So I'm worried about scenarios where you're using the build plan to communicate about a build time dependency, where its metadata changes between builds, right? But the final image you generate doesn't change, and it's irrelevant where, like what version of the build tool was used to create the image, because it hurts build reproducibility not to be able to exclude that thing. The solution to that could be, separate out the bill of materials and build plan things, right? That seems like a relatively simple path forward there. I'm a little afraid of making a breaking change here without thinking about the larger end state of what we want. So part of that is the excluding the build. Another thing that's come up is what Forrest mentioned, to be open to opening a PR, and is restructuring how they're received so that you don't get repeated arguments with the same name kind of out of order, that you get one argument with a name and then a list of the white box, just whiteboard things under it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how we want to handle the execution of, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so all very good points. All your concern about multiple breaks, I find very compelling as well. My strategy for dealing with that is these are a bunch of RFCs. These aren't even spec changes. I think each one of them should be handled individually so that we can actually get these through and get agreement on small things, and then batch the changes into a single spec change. Possibly multiple commits, but a single spec increment. Let's call it that, spec version increment.
Cool. As long as we're okay with that general direction, then
yeah,
sounds good to me.
Yeah. Anything else on build plan flexibility?
I guess the comment I made probably, I agree with Steven's comment about like on build plan or build materials and how this impacts that. So I think right now the build plan is pretty highly tied, and I think if you potentially remove versions and it is super flexible, it may not actually apply to build materials. You can put whatever you want in the build plan, right? And that's kind of by design of your proposal, right? This thing doesn't actually affect the build materials, and I wonder if that should make it into this RFC, or if that is out of scope.
We should do a separate thing that addresses the bill of materials being tied to the build plan. That is a very strong change we should make, but I think it is orthogonal to this particular question, because that flexibility issue already exists today, right? Today, there's nothing from stopping you from not using version and instead putting version into a field in the build plan metadata, right? The end result of this is actually already being delivered in all of the Java-based Paketo build packs. So we already have the problem, and the problem needs to be solved, but it's not exacerbated by this particular change.
The only tiny slice of it that we should maybe cover in this is that version, I believe, is a special key in the build materials as well. And if we're not solving the coupling problem, do we actually want to take it out there?
Is it a special key in the bill of materials, or is it a special key because it is a special key in the build plan? Yes. And the build plan and the bill of materials is a perfect reflection of the build plan.
It's not a perfect reflection, because the build plan requires and provides, and it gets merged into entries, and the entries get refined. So it looks
build pack plan.
It looks, well, we also add information about the build packs that they came from into it. So it's it's influenced by the fact that version is primarily coming from the build plan. If you changed it so that version wasn't special there, you would almost certainly change it so the version isn't special in the build materials. And if we're not going to make the build materials change as part of the RFC, it's probably worth calling out in this RFC that it also gets demoted in the build materials. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Can someone comment on that, on the issue? And I will update the content to do it.
I can do that.
Okay. Next one.
I guess my only comment, which I left as an actual comment, was are there things we can do to kind of help with incrementally moving to this thing with regards to the kind of the breaking change? And can we think about that as part of the proposal?
We could totally
that's a good idea.
We could totally just continue to allow version, right, and merge it into the metadata field. It would be really easy to do this in a very non-breaking way.
That was my suggestion. I guess the only complication is someone actually has a version thing already, which I don't know why they would, plus you in the old style, but that was kind of my proposal, was can we just automatically move that thing into metadata for them or something along the lines to make it more. So I think there are ways we could do it where it doesn't require us to be well, this just breaks the world. I think there is a path.
Yep.
That is happening.
I will. If you say you've already opened an issue or a comment for that, Terrence?
Yeah, I love to comment on that. Yeah.
Okay. I'll make an update in the what it is or how it works or something like that, obligating the life cycle to make this nice. Okay. Command line arguments. Some comments have actually already come back for this. The motivation for this particular thing is today you only have two options. You can run your application can run with a pre-built process type, including a default one if you don't specify one, or you can specify an entire command. But going back as far as, call it 5 years now, over on the Cloud Foundry side, there is an idea, it mostly relates to running with tasks, but it's by no means exclusive around this, where what you want to do is take all of a pre-built process type, because you don't want to know what it means to actually run Java, but you want to add some command line arguments to it. So it's really common sort of in the Spring Batch case. So describing if you're going to run 10 things in parallel, partitioning up the data set that's an input to those batch processes so that, each one works on a different piece. So you're going to need to start it. You don't want to know what the Java command actually started was, but you need to give them some information about what exactly they want to do. We don't have a strategy for this as it exists today, because, as I said, you only have those two particular options. We hashed out in Slack, in some Slack somewhere, I can't remember exactly how it happened, a strategy for this that basically says, take what we want and add slightly more to it. If there are 0 arguments, we're going to execute the default process type. If there are n number of arguments and the first one happens to be a process type, you execute that process type, and all subsequent arguments are arguments appended to the original command. If there's n args and the first argument doesn't match process type, but it does match something, and it does not match something on a resolved path, it will execute the default process type. So basically, in element 2 there, if the first one was web, we'd execute web and the thing that follows after it. For step 3, if the first one wasn't web and it wasn't bash or something like that, then you will assume that $1 was the first thing, you will assume that you're using the default and you'll just append all of the arguments. And then the final one is, if it is something that is on the path, something like bin bash, we will execute that, and all of the subsequent arguments are simply arguments. So that is a horrible way to explain something that actually is reasonable here.
I strongly agree that we should figure out a solution to arguments that, allows people to use the image as a, command and then pass additional arguments to it, and that the current thing doesn't, do what we, doesn't behave enough like normal Docker images that people, find it acceptable, right? However, I have 2 big concerns. One is it feels very weird to arbitrarily append things to a shell command separated by a space. The shell command could be weird bash syntax with a conditional at the end, right? Like it seems very risky, and I haven't seen that pattern used anywhere else, to just space this at the end of a shell command. It almost feels like it's making an assumption that it's a bash shell command that looks a certain way, and that worries me. And the second thing was,
so you'd made a suggestion there about making the pre-built commands aware of incoming arguments in some way. We attempted to do this originally in the Cloud Foundry world, and it was roundly rejected by everybody. So it is definitely safer. You won't catch an argument from me on that, but as a UX, people really, really didn't like it.
For instance, like $1 in the thing. So the current way it works with, if you specify command and args and your direct equals false, then the args get provided properly, like as arguments to the original thing as a function that's quotable, and you don't have issues with trying to concat pieces of bash stuff together. That's what you're saying was rejected for Cloud Foundry initially?
No, not a dollar adding of it, but the idea that there was some variable you could set to pass it in, and the command had to be aware of it. There was rejection on both sides. People who wanted to contribute arguments didn't like having to set a special environment variable, which doesn't particularly parse well, right? Because then we'd have to more or less shell parse a string on the way in. And people who wrote command line arguments, especially in cases where they weren't required, didn't like sort of needing to know ahead of time that arguments might be provided. I'm okay to, like, maybe we can come up with a better strategy this time around, but we should be sensitive to the fact that the accuracy may need to be tempered with some pragmatism.
The arguments as they're provided, would you expect those to be parsed by the shell in the environment that the command is being executed? So do you want to append something that has an environment variable in it, for instance?
I think that should be on the table, yeah.
That's a very interesting problem. It's like,
yeah.
Like, is there a way to, in direct equals false case, should we be, interpreting the arguments in the context of the shell and then somehow providing them up? Is there a solution there that is clean?
Yeah,
require appending?
We should. I'm really interested for this one to actually get quite a lot of sort of practical feedback on. My read from specifically Spring teams who are asking for this is what they want is logically for you to append this to the command that was going to execute. Ignore for a moment the, trying to do delimiting and delimiting and guaranteeing that the argument set is the same set of arguments. What they visualize in their minds is providing a set of arguments, and then you prepend the command that was going to run in front of those arguments.
You could imagine you shove the command into a script, right? And you pass the other arguments to that as a script, right? I guess that's essentially the same as the behavior right now in direct false, if you pass the arguments through and can reference them.
Yeah.
But you still do, you could see a way we could do this where you get shell parsing on the arguments and the arguments get passed to the commands, and but they're properly received as, either $1, $2, or in your case, I think what you're looking for is at the end of the command, you put $ampersand, right? Maybe there's a way we could automate that where by default, we append quoted $ampersand.
$at.
Yeah,
$at, right?
$at,
yeah.
Sorry, yes. Quoted $at to the end of the command without you having to do that, right?
Yeah.
And then those arguments get shell parsed in and then interpolated, and then it would be very clean, right? It wouldn't just be string appending. So that could be a path forward. I'm not opposed to that at all.
Worth noting that when I played with that, it wasn't getting evaluated necessarily at that point in the command that you might think. You can sort of see the comment I put on that issue. Like if you pass in that argument yourself, you could put $at and it works. But when you put it in the TOML file, something was going wrong with where it got evaluated. And that might just be like a weird launcher edge case.
I think the idea
we'd have to play with it to make sure I think the idea is solid, but we should figure out what we're doing that breaks that and make sure that we can fix it without breaking something else.
I think the idea is it might be implicit, so you don't have to reference that. You could either have a flag that enables the behavior or disables the behavior, but we could, in how we execute the command, append. See, there's still an appending there, which bothers me, but append quote space quote $at sign unquote, and then maybe that's
This
better.
feels like one of the things where we probably want to spike an implementation to find out what's actually possible before approving the RFC.
I would also like to see prior art. Like when you do any other tools, this feels like it's a relatively common-ish problem, right? What do other tools that
doesn't NPM do this with like NPM run, stuff like that, or NPM run, because you can have all those custom ones that you define in the package.
Wait, can you pass arguments to that in NPM run? Or doesn't NPM run just run the thing that was defined?
I thought you could pass arguments in like custom ones, but maybe not. I have to double check.
Okay.
So
Stephen, can you do a quick comment on their requesting prior art?
Yep, I can do that.
Just so I don't forget it.
I also had one more concern, but Joe, sorry.
Yeah, just let me get started. So it's a little bit higher level though. Like I worry about the confluence of two things. One is that for some platforms, this might be difficult to implement, and certainly that's true with Heroku, where you'd have to expose, like what was previously kind of touch-free other than like completely overriding. You have to introduce some kind of new mechanism to support this. But that's fine. Like we could just not support it. But then I worry about build packs that are, a whole bunch of build packs come around that are expecting this, and then their process types don't work unless you use this capability. So those two things coming together worries me a little bit. Whereas like the alternative you have with the NVARs, like while it's brittle, doesn't really encourage you to like make process types that would break, I guess. But I think what would make me more comfortable is if we also exposed a mechanism in like Project TOML, which is, I know we want this at some point, which is like proc file, or like defining process types for your image in the Project TOML, and then also supporting this kind of thing. So that's just something that's on my mind.
Yeah, definitely adding this functionality to Project TOML is interesting. If you could, again, put a comment in just to remind me so I go back and do that. Definitely like that idea, specifically arguments only kind of additions in addition to the proc file, here's an entire command kind of addition.
Yeah, I worry that it's a can of worms, because like we kind of punted on anything that related to the run image in Project TOML, because eventually I think we want to support configurations for multiple images, but maybe there's something we can do. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I'll comment on that.
Yeah, let's go.
My last other thing that I wanted to call out is there's a lot of overloading involved on a single list in this case. So like there's for instance, the behavior of checking to see if a binary exists and then passing the thing as an argument if a binary doesn't exist seems like it could lead to really unexpected behavior where your first argument happens to be the name of the binary, and so it executes that binary instead.
That Slack discussion, which maybe I should actually put in the entire discussion. I had the original exact same objection to it. Like there is enough vagueness in the fact that you sort of, it's like not just a pure look ahead. There is some retreat in certain cases. Really disturbs me. But again, I think it's a pragmatic choice given how a user visualizes the resolution.
I feel like the more breaking alternative, which is probably safer, would be to say that you can't pass a process type as a directly into the launcher. Instead, you have to set CMB process type, and then if you want to override the command, you'd set it to like CMB process type none or something like that. But that, like, what's nice about this is it kind of works with things as they are now.
It's the argument versus,
think of the,
it's the argument versus path thing that actually bothers me the most, because that there's like, it could be lots and lots of things in the path that are also very reasonable arguments. It feels like there's a
yeah, but if you make people set the process type, that also works for the argument versus path thing, because you don't assume you're overriding the whole command unless it's none. You're like, this isn't a process type, therefore it's not an argument, it's a command.
Yeah, and I mean, to step back, this is already pretty confusing, right? Like, I think it's not very well documented, and I think this is probably the best documentation that we have about how the launch sequence works. So I don't know that there would really be a lot of challenges for breaking anything that currently exists if we were to better define what, would be best for the UX, essentially.
My general feeling is that people expect Docker images to behave where they pass arguments and then they get passed in as arguments, and that should be like the defaulty thing, and that we should figure out ways of not breaking that and supporting the other functionality on top of it. So we're not building images that are less compliant seeming than what other people are building, which is hard because we have this launcher thing, but it's probably not impossible, right?
Yeah, like I think that analog's really, really good, because it effectively is saying your process type is the entry point, right, for this particular image. The problem is that it's not, and we have, if the, let's take a step back and say, actually, if the launcher had never taken arbitrary commands, if you couldn't do docker run bin bash, we'd be in a much better situation, right? It'd be totally consistent. But the fact that today, when you pass a very specific argument, we actually execute that thing instead, rather than as an argument to the launcher or to your process type.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, like I don't think we need to beat a dead horse here. Please comment, love feedback on this particular thing. This is definitely, we've gotten requests from more than just the Spring team around this particular use case. So it's definitely something we want to get in and to get right. And I think we should stop there for today and bring the other two to tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See you.